If money has ever felt like it slips away faster the harder you try, this isn't just bad luck. There's a quiet rule most people never see. When you have less, life slowly costs more. Small problems don't vanish, they wait. You work, you worry, you cut back, yet somehow end up right where you started. Not because you failed, but because there's a hidden cost attached to being short on cash. Tonight, we're breaking down that cost, the poverty premium, and how it keeps people stuck without them even noticing. It usually doesn't announce itself. There's no warning sound, no clear moment where life tells you that the rules have changed. It starts quietly. A bill that feels a little heavier than it should. A repair you delay because this month already feels tight. A decision that seems reasonable in isolation. You tell yourself you'll catch up next week or next paycheck, but that moment never really arrives. Instead, pressure becomes part of the background. You adjust. You normalize it. You start measuring life in small trade-offs. Groceries now, something else later. And slowly, without realizing it, your world shrinks. Not because you're careless, not because you don't work hard enough, but because when money is tight, every choice carries extra weight. Small problems don't stay small. They wait, they stack. And over time, you're not just managing expenses, you're managing consequences. This is the trap most people don't see. Life doesn't get harder all at once. It gets heavier, one quiet decision at a time. Once money becomes tight, it doesn't just sit in your bank account. It moves into your head. It follows you to work. It waits with you in traffic. It hums quietly in the background while you try to focus on anything else. You can be having a normal conversation and still be calculating numbers in your mind. Rent, fuel, groceries, days left. Not consciously, automatically. This is where the trap deepens. Because when your mind is occupied by survival math, it has less space for everything else. Planning feels exhausting. Long-term thinking feels unrealistic. Even simple decisions start to feel heavy. You're not lazy. You're overloaded. People on the outside often mistake this for irresponsibility. They wonder why someone takes the expensive option, the short-term fix, the decision that causes more problems later. What they don't see is the mental tax being paid every hour. When every choice feels urgent, the cheapest option looks safer than the best one. You delay maintenance. You postpone health. You choose relief over strategy, not because you want comfort, but because your brain is trying to reduce pressure in the fastest way possible. Over time, this constant mental strain reshapes behavior. You stop thinking in months and start thinking in days, sometimes in hours. The future becomes abstract. The present becomes loud. And while it may look like poor planning from the outside, from the inside, it feels like drowning while being asked to swim smarter. This is how being short on cash quietly limits not just what you can buy, but what you can even think about. And once your thinking shrinks, the system begins to close in around it. When your life starts to feel tighter, it isn't just because of the choices you're making. It's also because the system is responding to you differently, quietly, automatically. Once your finances look unstable, everything around you begins to treat you as a risk, not in words, in pricing, in rules, in friction. You don't get rejected outright. You get charged more. This is the moment most people don't notice. The bank doesn't accuse you of being irresponsible. It simply adds fees, a higher interest rate, a lower balance requirement you can't meet, one late payment, one missed date, and the cost of money itself rises. You aren't borrowing more. You're paying extra for the same dollar. The label is invisible, but the consequences are not. The same thing happens with transportation. When you don't have savings or good credit, you don't get access to reliable options. You get what's available. Higher mileage, higher rates, shorter terms that look manageable month to month, but quietly bleed you over time. The system assumes you're risky, so it protects itself first. You absorb the cost. And the irony is brutal. The people least able to afford instability are forced to live with the most of it. Housing follows the same logic. Deposits go up. Flexibility goes down. You pay more to prove you're trustworthy, even though the reason you look risky is because you don't have the money to appear stable in the first place. It's a loop with no obvious entrance and no clear exit. Stability is required to access stability. None of this feels dramatic in the moment. It feels procedural, normal, just how things work. But over time, these penalties stack. You aren't falling behind because you stopped trying. You're falling behind because the cost of participating keeps rising. The system doesn't push you down. It simply makes standing still more expensive. And once this happens, every future decision is made under pressure. You aren't choosing between good and bad options anymore. You're choosing between expensive and more expensive. This is how risk turns into reality, and how financial stress stops being temporary and starts becoming structural. Once the system starts treating you as a risk, it doesn't just charge you more. It slows your entire life down. Not all at once. Not dramatically. In small, exhausting ways that are easy to dismiss, but impossible to escape. Things that should be simple start requiring effort. Extra steps, extra planning, extra waiting. Convenience quietly disappears, and friction takes its place. When money is tight, time behaves differently. You don't just run errands. You schedule your life around them. You wait for buses instead of driving. You walk further to save a little cash. You stand in lines because faster options cost more. What takes someone else 10 minutes can take you an hour, sometimes two. Not because you're inefficient, but because the easiest path is locked behind a price you can't pay. This friction seeps into everything. Laundry isn't a routine. It's a half-day task. Groceries aren't a quick stop. They're a calculation of distance, timing, and what you can carry. Even basic appointments require coordination, favors, and patience. None of these moments feel significant on their own, but together, they create a constant drag on your life. You end most days tired in a way that sleep doesn't fully fix. And this is the part people underestimate. Time isn't just time. It's energy. It's focus. It's momentum. When your day is filled with small obstacles, you have less left over for anything else. Learning feels heavy. Planning feels overwhelming. Improving your situation feels like something you'll get to later, when things calm down. But they rarely do. From the outside, this looks like poor time management. From the inside, it feels like life has more resistance than it should. Like every task requires effort just to reach the starting line. This is how friction quietly steals opportunity. It doesn't announce itself as theft. It disguises itself as routine. And by the time you notice how much time it's taken, the pressure has already tightened around the rest of your life. After a while, the problem stops looking like money altogether. It starts looking like a lack of choices. This is where the gap quietly forms. People often think money is about buying things. It's not. Money is about buying options. And when you don't have it, those options slowly disappear until life begins to feel narrow, rigid, and unforgiving. When you have even a small financial cushion, decisions stay flexible. You can say no. You can wait. You can choose the better option instead of the urgent one. But when you're living close to the edge, every decision becomes a commitment. Not because you want it to be, but because it has to be. You don't choose what's best. You choose what's possible right now. This is how the optionality gap opens. One person looks at a problem and sees multiple paths. Another looks at the same problem and sees one door already closing. The difference isn't intelligence or effort. It's liquidity. The ability to pause without collapsing. The ability to absorb a hit without panicking. Think about repairs. When something breaks and you don't have savings, you're forced into the cheapest fix, even if it's temporary. That temporary fix fails. Then it fails again. Each time it costs more, not just in money, but in stress and urgency. Someone with options fixes the problem once and moves on. Someone without options lives inside it. The same logic applies to work. When you need every paycheck to survive, you can't afford to be patient. You can't afford to wait for a better role, negotiate pay, or leave a bad environment. You stay. You endure. Not because you're weak, but because quitting without a buffer feels like stepping into free fall. Stability becomes something you cling to, even when it's slowly draining you. This is why advice like just make better choices feels hollow. Choices require room. They require slack. Without that space, decision-making turns reactive. Life becomes a series of forced moves. You're not playing the game strategically. You're responding to threats as they appear. What makes the optionality gap especially painful is how invisible it is. From the outside, it looks like two people making different decisions. From the inside, it feels like one person is allowed to hesitate and the other isn't. One can delay gratification. The other is punished for delay. One buys freedom quietly. The other rents survival loudly. Over time, this gap compounds. The person with options accumulates more of them. The person without options loses the few they had, not through recklessness, but through necessity. This is how financial pressure turns into long-term inequality, not through dramatic failure, but through a slow narrowing of what's even allowed. And once your life is reduced to managing commitments instead of choosing paths, the question stops being, what do I want to do? It becomes, what can I afford to survive? That's the real cost of having less. Not the absence of comfort, but the absence of choice. When life has been narrowed down to survival, the idea of an exit can feel unrealistic. Not impossible, just distant. This is where most advice fails. It tells people to think bigger, aim higher, take risks. But when you're already operating with no room for error, risk isn't exciting. It's dangerous. The real way out doesn't begin with ambition. It begins with relief. The first shift isn't about making more money. It's about stopping the invisible losses. The leaks that exist only because you don't have a buffer. Late fees, emergency fixes, high-interest borrowing, rush decisions that cost more over time. None of these feel like choices, but they are costs. And they all share the same root cause, a lack of breathing room. This is why the buffer matters. Not as a milestone, not as a badge of discipline, but as protection. A small amount of saved cash doesn't change who you are. It changes how problems behave. A flat tire stops being a crisis and becomes an inconvenience. A medical bill stops forcing panic and starts allowing options. That difference alone alters the entire rhythm of your life. With a buffer in place, time begins to slow down again. You can pause before reacting. You can compare instead of rushing. You can fix things early, when they're cheap, instead of late, when they're destructive. This isn't financial genius. It's defensive stability, and it's the most undervalued form of wealth there is. What makes this difficult is the psychological pull in the opposite direction. When you've been deprived for a long time, any extra money feels like permission to finally breathe, to finally feel normal. And that urge makes sense. But every time you trade that relief for something temporary, you delay the moment when relief becomes permanent. The buffer doesn't feel rewarding at first. It feels boring, restrictive, even unfair, until the day it quietly saves you. The exit isn't dramatic. There's no moment where everything flips. What changes is how often you're forced into bad decisions. With even a small reserve, you start avoiding the most expensive paths. You stop paying penalties for urgency. You regain the ability to choose the second best option now so you don't have to accept the worst one later. Over time, this compounds. Less pressure leads to clearer thinking. Clearer thinking leads to better decisions. Better decisions reduce risk. Reduced risk lowers costs. The same system that once punished you starts easing up, not because it became kinder, but because you no longer trigger its alarms as often. This is the quiet truth most people miss. Escaping the poverty premium isn't about winning the game. It's about changing the rules you're playing under. You don't need to outrun the system. You need to stop bleeding inside it. So there's one practical step that matters more than any strategy. It's this. Identify the expense that exists only because you don't have money and eliminate it. Not forever. Just once. Sell something. Take on temporary work. Delay gratification a little longer. Not as punishment, but as an investment in control. You aren't depriving yourself. You're buying your future choices back. This journey isn't fair. The climb from zero is steep, and the margin for error is thin. But once you understand that being poor isn't a moral failure, it's a structural penalty, the shame lifts. And when shame lifts, focus returns. You stop blaming yourself and start targeting the actual problem. The goal isn't wealth. It's stability. It's the ability to say no to bad deals, to wait without panic, to fix problems while they're still small. That's how the trap loosens. Not all at once, but steadily. And once you've created that space, The system no longer decides your future for you. You do.